Sourdough is a very fun hobby. You may have heard of it, but if not, it's basically just growing your own yeast. All you need to do is take some flour, add water, throw half of it away every morning, and re-add more flour and water, and do this for 6 or 7 days, and natural wild yeast will begin to grow on it. Every week you have to feed your sourdough, and by feeding, that means you take half of it out and you make a loaf of bread out of it, and then you add more food or raw flour to the sourdough and put it back in the fridge. When you make a batch of sourdough, it is like a pet. It's alive. You should give it a name. My sourdough I have named the Blob. To feed the Blob each week, you take your jar of Blob, and you need a bowl, and we're going to pour half of this into this bowl. We have a cup of water. These are exactly a cup, these glasses, but you can measure it with your own measuring cup. We're going to put some flour in another glass. I like to do it just to keep it dry. I like to use a fork to stir it around. So I'm going to open up my jar of delicious yeast. And you can smell the hooch. It's like a liquid on the top. It's alcohol. I'm going to stir it. I usually stir it. You pour about half of it into the bowl. You got a big bowl. If you can see that, but it looks delicious with bubbles. It smells great. So put half of it in there. Then what I like to do is take the cup of water. I'll pour half in here and half in here. And I stir it. I think this helps to liquefy your yeast before adding any flour. So always add the water first. Stir it around. Stirring. So now we're going to there's going to be a lot of stirring because you want it to go to emulsify together. So now we've split the yeast and we've added more liquid, about a cup. I usually like to put the flour in a dry cup, so if you have two measuring cups you can use that, but I have these cups which are exactly 1 cup anyway. So I'm going to pour it slowly into this one. You stir. You pour some into this one. So this is feeding the Blob. We're feeding the Blob. So we're feeding this jar also. The jar. So this is the sourdough starter that will continue to age for the next 100 years, and you pass it down to your grandchildren. So you just keep feeding this. It's like a plant. If you feed it, it will live forever. There could be generations and generations enjoying your Blob that you create of your own. The reason we call it the Blob is because if you've ever seen the movie, it's like a 1950s movie with Steve McQueen. It looks sort of like this. It's a great movie. Highly recommend. Okay, we ran out of flour, so I'm going to pour some. I just find it easier to pour it into a glass. With the Blob, there's very lax regulations. You sort of do it by feel. The Blob doesn't have any rules. As you can see, it's starting to get a little less liquidy. If you can see that, but You just keep stirring. I think this starter dough we're going to put back in the fridge, so I'm going to close it, and you throw it into the fridge. I'm going to add a little bit of the Hodgson mill rye. I could have added it to the starter. I've done that in the past. You mix it up, and it's an evolution process. The blob is evolving, and soon will surpass humans in its intellectual capacity. I throw whole wheat in here occasionally. But see, it's a diverse group of yeast that can eat anything. You can even make hard apple cider out of the blob, which if you look, I have another video on that online. Okay, now we're done. So I'm going to just scrape off the last little bits with my finger here. We wrap it up. Put a little piece of plastic over to keep it moist, otherwise you'll get a crust. It'll dry up. We're going to let it sit overnight. In a regular temperature spot, like not near a heater or anything, just let it sit and rest. Okay, that's stage one of making a blob loaf. Okay, now it's the next day. We're ready for the second part of making our bread. So now the blob has been sitting for about 12 hours overnight. For the next step, we will need sea salt. We have Himalayan pink salt. We will need some more water. And we will need some flour. Probably about 2 more cups of flour. This is 1 cup. We will need yellow cornmeal. And we have our pans and some butter. First, I will take the mixture and add some water, and so we can add some more volume to it by adding more flour to get a nice big loaf. So about 1 cup of water. Now that it is more liquid, we will add in our salt. I never measure. Probably the equivalent of 2 or 3 tablespoons. I use a fork and I stir it around to let the salt get mixed in nice. Now slowly stir in the flour. I throw about 1/4 of a cup at a time, and then you just stir it. And you just keep doing this. Once this is done, I'll fill up another cup. The cup just helps me to portion it better, and just a little bit at a time until you see it getting thicker. You don't want to pour in so much that it gets dry. You want it to be really sticky, but slightly more viscous than this. So now it's looking more like the true blob it is. But I always just go by feel. Okay, at this stage, you're going to let it rest. It's really sticky. I may add more flour, but I'm going to switch to using my hands at this point. First, we're going to just let it rest. Probably for like 10 or 15 minutes. Again, I'm going to prepare now my baking pan. I'm going to just grab some butter and you rub it around until it's good and buttered. Now, we'll take a little bit of cornmeal. Just take a pinch. Then to spread it around, you just tap it like this. And that's pretty good. Now we'll put that aside and let this rest for another 5-10 minutes. Now the nice thing about making a blob sourdough bread is you make it in a bowl, so there's not really any mess to clean up other than what's inside the bowl. It's been resting about 10 minutes. So what I do is I'll wet my hands. The sink is right behind me. I wet one hand, and basically you just go in and you grab it and you flip it. So if you can see, I'm sort of scooping around and I'm just folding it. Pulling and folding. It's still a little wet, so I'm going to add a little bit of flour till it feels about right, but you can see you don't want it too stiff. So I'm going to add a little bit more flour. There's probably about 1/3 of a cup. And again, you just fold it in. And just keep going around. I spin the bowl, pull, fold, spin, pull, fold. Let's see. You can do this for as long as you want. Probably you could go for 10 minutes, 5 minutes. I could probably stop now, but you sort of notice it pulling against the bowl. See? And when it sort of pulls off the bowl, that means you're getting a good stretchy dough. That's probably good. You could go more, a little less, but we'll just stop here and just see what happens. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my pan here, and I'm just going to continue folding. Get it all as much as you can into the pan. See, it's just like the Blob, if you ever watched the movie. Classic movie. Highly recommend. Steve McQueen's first movie, The Blob. If you remember, at the beginning of The Blob, a little piece of the blob fixed to a man's hand. And that was the end of him. Next, we want to cover it. This will keep all sorts of dust or anything out of the dough, and also help to maintain its moisture. We don't want it to dry out while it's rising. Now, if I just cover it over flat, what tends to happen is if this is really a good batch and it rises too much, it comes and it sticks to the plastic, which can be sort of messy. And when you're taking it off, it sticks and pulls apart and affects the rise. So I've made these little tin foil arches that just fit over it, just to help keep the plastic up. So when it rises, it won't attach to the dough. So then I'm just going to take some of the stretch tight, pull off a good sized piece, and then we're just going to put it over here. My little arches work usually, and then just seal it off. And I'm just going to put it over into a cooler place. There's a radiator under here. You could leave it here, but it'll rise faster. And I want it to rise over the next 4 to 6 hours. So right now it's 12:30. I'll come back later when it's risen and tell you what time it is and how long it's risen. After about 3 hours, you can see it's risen substantially. It's 3:30, and we'd covered it at 12:30. Let's look again in a few hours. Okay, the bread has risen quite a bit. It's about 7 o'clock, so about 6.5 hours it has been rising. So now we're going to just get it ready and throw it into the oven. First, let's take the plastic off. See, it does stick a little bit, so luckily we had our little arches here to stop that from happening. So just take them off. So now we're going to get it ready to go into the oven. The oven we will turn on to 425 degrees. Then we will cook it covered for 1/2 hour and then uncovered for 25 minutes to 30 minutes. To get the bread ready to go in, we will spritz it with some water. So you set it onto a mist. And then you spray the bread with some water so when it's cooking, this will not harden and it'll allow it to expand. And I usually spray a little bit into the pan that's going to cover it. I put another pan over it to help retain the moisture so it can continue to expand or pop, as they call it. Now we're going to put it into the oven. It will stay in the oven for 30 minutes. So we're going to set the timer for 30 minutes. When that goes off, you will take the top off of the bread and run it for another 25 to 30 minutes.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay, so now that's the first 30 minutes. Now we were going to take the bread out and remove the top. Well, it's puffed up nicely. So now we're going to throw it in for another 25 to 30 minutes. So we'll set the timer for 25 minutes. Again, it's at 425 degrees. So put the timer on to 25, and then we can check and see if we want it to go a little longer. Eight,
7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Blast off.
It's blobby time. So now, this is the second cooking. The first one was with the lid on. Now the blob has got a nice crust on it. You'll want to remove it and put it on a rack. And close the oven. We're going to close the oven up. Now, since you've put the cornmeal on the bottom, watch how easy the bread falls out. Set it upright, and we're going to just let it cool for a while. It's best to let it cool. You could cut it right away, which is delicious, but we're going to let it cool. And then we'll make a cut and we will show you what it looks like. So we're going to let Blobby sleep a peaceful sleep tonight, and in the morning we will cut Blobby open and see how the crust has turned out. Okay, it's the next day. We didn't really have a chance to try the bread, but let's cut it and we'll see what the crust looks like. It's a nice sawing sound. Look at that. It's got very nice air pockets. Very soft, substantial to the touch. And there you have it, Another beautiful loaf of the Blob. So if you have time, give it a try yourself. You will not regret it. And you'll also have a lifetime of very inexpensive and extremely delicious bread. Thank you for watching the Jolux channel. Please subscribe and have a wonderful day. This is what you can do with the Blob. Grilled cheese, toast, anything you want. Delicious.